Yeah.
Good evening. This is the February 26, 2025 meeting of the Needham Community Preservation Committee. I'm Dave Harris, committee chair. As a reminder, this meeting is being broadcast to the town's YouTube channel and via Zoom. And it's being recorded for publication, later viewing, and administrative purposes. We're missing a few people tonight. Keith is out. Adam is sick. And you may not have heard, but our latest member, Betsy Mullane, has resigned. Okay, so we're 8 people. Quorum is 5. And it doesn't look like we're gonna get a new member, before we vote and have our public hearing. So sorry to hear that. So looks like everybody's here except for Keith and Adam. So I won't take roll. Okay. First, item on the agenda is the minutes, last week's meeting.
Actually, I did not circulate those, so
Okay.
we'll bump that to the next meeting.
Select board consultation we had last night. Went through all the projects. We got some feedback, but I think they're pretty much in support of everything. Reg was there. We heard it, so
Nothing negative, really, about anything.
no, there were some good questions. There were some questions about the messaging, especially with the housing projects, so make sure that, we had the right messaging. But other than that, it was just, some routine questions. We have a finance committee consultation when next week.
Next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, I was just talking with Peter, and no, if you all know Peter, Pingador, from Teachuk, and we had talked about a consultation, discussion with Teachuk about our projects this year, and they agreed to do that on the 10th of March. So that's something that we could put on schedule. That's their regular meeting. And they want to be cautious and not get into a situation where they're advising us, but we would still like to get their input.
Did you, is that the entire committee, is that you
No,
and I? or just-
it'd be just a chair.
Okay,
But it's a open meeting. Anybody can listen in.
Okay.
So. The next item is the CPC finances. We put together a 1-page chart on where we stand this year, and it was included in the meeting packets. So, bottom line is, if we approve all the requests, non-housing requests, and we, use money that ordinarily would have been pushed forward till the next fiscal year, we have about $6 million to potentially allocate to the housing projects, which is a little less than what's been requested, but I think it's good news. Anybody have any questions or thoughts about them? Was the chart helpful?
Very helpful. Yes, yeah, very. If we're borrowing against next year, in effect, what is expected to be available for projects next year?
Well, if you look at the levy plus the match, it might be 4 million, right? Out of that 4 million, 1.2 million is gonna go to debt service. $80,000 or plus or minus will go to the administration. 10%, maybe around 400,000 would go to the open space reserve. And 20%, 22% would go to the housing reserve, and the rest would go to free cash. So I would say if you take out the 1.2 and then say the 450,000 for open space, no reserve is necessary for history because debt service. So what does that leave? Like a little more than $2 million?
Yeah,
Something like that. Yeah, so that's what we have to play around.
I don't think the term borrowing
Well,
is quite the right
yeah,
thing.
I wasn't
Utilizing, maybe.
utilizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be less
Yeah,
than,
just
what's
sense.
been carried over in the past, but, this year we got some big asks.
Yeah.
Anyway. So. No questions there, we have, Emily with us, and she prepared a memo, which I thought was quite a good, interesting, informative memo, with regard to the two housing projects. I don't know if you've all had a chance to read it before the meeting. She brought up a few questions that I think are, important. So, Emily, do you want to give us, the highlights of
Mr.
the?
Chair, I also invited Matt Zajac to come tonight. He might be in the attendees there. Just in case some questions came up that I wouldn't be able to answer.
Yeah.
Okay, I assume you want the short version of this, not the long version.
I thought your memo was well written and, concise.
Thank you.
Even though it covered, some fairly complicated issues
Yeah.
and, I'll just make an aside. This is one thing that was brought up at the select board meeting. People were asking questions about, fair claw transfers and all this kind of stuff.
Actually,
Yeah.
what was most impressive is that Dave and Maureen and Lauren were answering those questions.
Yeah, without you, right?
Exactly. I was just in the back saying, actually, not bad.
Yeah, but I think, it's my opinion, I think there's a danger that, there's a lot of complications and getting into the weeds sometimes. I don't think it's productive, especially if somebody hasn't really studied the situation. So I think it's a challenge to try to, explain to somebody what's really going on without getting into too much detail. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm hesitant to get too much into the weeds. I think for that you can read the whole memo. What I tried to do was to just go through the two projects in detail, sort of how they're put together and sort of pick at them and see, if there were any places that I thought we could push back, and try to look at it another way and save some money, since that seems to be what the challenge is here. And then I also gave you some recommendations, from my point of view of how to get the most public benefit out of the dollars that you're gonna put into these projects. So, starting with seabeds, I think, without getting into all the details overall, I think this project is very tight in terms of how it's being underwritten. I would say almost too tight in terms of, for example, the cash flow, how they look at income minus expenses, how much debt to carry and what's left over as a margin for operating is really low, and so low that in fact they have some of the operating costs funded, so to speak, below the line, meaning, and some important ones like tenant services. There isn't enough room in the budget the way it's currently construed, because the amount of debt they want to carry the full operating costs, including tenant services and half of the management fee in the budget. So, that's just a comment that they're pushing this kind of to the extreme to try to raise the capital funds, which is why they're coming to you for such a large amount. And it only makes it worse, so to speak, if we say, well, we really think your debt coverage should be 1.15, then they're going to ask you for more money. So it's just a comment to say that at the end of the day, it may not end up looking like this because a lender may think that that's too tight. But since they don't have investors, tax credit investors, they have a little more leeway than usual. And I think the main thing to say about this is I think they have, they are stuck in this project. They really don't have another way to finance it. And it's a combination of the fact that the cost went up since it was originally conceived, that the program they were relying on using from HUD to do the refinancing, was canceled. And now they had to switch to another program that requires them to do even more capital needs. And the fact that the way this was interlinked and joined at the hip with Linden Terrace, and this has to do with the transfer of the Faircloth units, but Linden Terrace went first in sort of, in the queue at HLC at the state. So Linden Terrace is now in a position, at least the first phase 1A, to get funded, but it needs from this project the Faircloth units that we've talked about to death. The 41 Faircloth units have to come from this project, or the other project can't get done. And then on top of that, they really can't go for tax credits for this project. I do agree with their analysis, but it's just, it's a bad confluence of events in terms of the timing of the way, with hindsight, the way it was pursued, with the other one coming first. They can't go for tax credits because it's not going to score well for tax credits. It's a preservation project, which is not considered to be at risk like other privately owned preservation projects. It's not adding any new units. It's federal public housing. It's just not going to score well. So they're in a bind. And, if I were them, I would be coming to you for the same amount of money. There's no other way to do it. And that, it's an unfortunate situation. It doesn't give much choice. It's obviously a very needy project and will be a beneficial project and is necessary for the other project that you committed funds to last year. So, giving you a few recommendations for conditions that I would suggest you're conditioning the funds on. One of them is in terms of long-term affordability. The goal here is to maintain the type of restrictions that they are starting out with. And in their case, there's an underlying restriction for if, in worst case, if all the deep subsidies, the Section 8s were to disappear, what would happen here? And there's an underlying restriction currently at 80% of AMI, and that's what I would hold them to in terms of a restriction running with the land. There is a restriction, similar restriction that they're going to have from HUD that comes with this RAD program, which we discussed a lot when you were funding the other project, Linden Terrace. And my analysis of that is that it's not really good enough. We don't exactly know what the nature of that restriction is going to be because HUD's changing this program. They're now putting one restriction on, this is good, on all the units in the project, not just the RAD units, which are only 4, but the other 42 will have the same restriction. So we don't exactly know what that use restriction is going to look like. But even the current one, it does survive foreclosure, but it doesn't survive a situation where there's an extraordinary cause of ending the Section 8 contract, like, let's say, a failure of appropriations at the federal level. We believe this will never happen, but these days, I don't, I wouldn't say anything. I don't know what's gonna happen. Nobody knows. Just don't even read the newspaper to find out. So, you know, and community preservation funds are supposed to come with an affordability restriction. So, I would say, and I don't think they should have a problem with this, because it's the same restriction that they're gonna have presumably from HUD to maintain all the units at 80% of AMI. And then I would add the obligation to renew the project-based deep subsidy contracts, which is also presently in the RAD contract, but just to make sure, because we don't know what that's gonna say. And also, this would be something, your own restriction is a restriction the town could enforce and would run with the land, so it's a good idea. Then I recommended this last year. I know there's lots of steps involved in this, and it may not be something you want to do right now, but I just feel like I have to say it because I would hope that you would pay attention to this, if not for now, for the future. The idea of, if you're going to be granting such large sums of money, you should do it in the form of a loan, not a grant, and try to collect some of it back through repayment out of cash flow. This is what everybody else, you know, at the state level, when they make a loan, this is what they do when they make a grant. Sometimes it goes as a grant to the sponsor, and then the sponsor puts it in as a loan and gets it back. And this, in a tax credit project, that's the way it would be done. In this project, there aren't those kinds of necessities because it's not a tax credit project. This is getting too complicated. But my point is, there's very little cash flow in this project. I'm really trying to establish this, encourage you to establish this as a precedent for all projects, or you could say all projects over a certain, you know, size of funding. It's certainly $3 million, you know, is a large amount. And the way this works, as I think we talked about it last time a little bit, it doesn't affect the bottom line because it's not mandatory debt service. It doesn't affect the sizing of their first mortgage. It comes out of cash flow. So, you know, if you have $100 rent a month and $50 of operating expenses, you have $50 of cash flow that would normally go to the owner. If the state money is involved, the state will say, we want 50%, and the owner gets 50%. So the town could say, and many towns do, well, we want half of the public share. So give us half of the state's 50, and the owner gets 50. Sometimes it gets split 3 ways. But you know, this project, I didn't run the numbers on this one. I did run it on the other one because this one had such small amount of cash flow. But I think if you do it for one, you do it for the other. And that's what I would recommend. And the third thing is just to say, because they indicated, excuse me, that they wanted some of the small amount of the money, not so small, 750,000 prior to closing. I think that should be at your discretion, and it shouldn't be done until after the funding commitments are there. Otherwise, you're on the hook for that. And you know, it's not a huge amount of money, and it may be that it gets to a point where you definitely see that they are heading towards a closing and you're able to do it without risk. But in general, you want this money to be coming in at closing when you know that the project is going to happen. I should have said in the very beginning, I'm only talking about funding CBEDS. I don't see how you can fund the other one as well. So I didn't even analyze that. And it seems like, you know, we were all in agreement that what's needed, it would be great to be able to fund both. But at this point, given the constraints on your funding and that the need is really only for CBEDS, because the need is only for those 41 Faircloth units right now, because we're only talking about phase 1A of Linden. That's the only phase that is in the queue, so to speak, or possibly in the queue to be funded by the state. So I didn't even look. I did, in the numbers, I did put in a column that showed what % of the total costs for the two projects combined was actually being allocated to Seabeds, and Seabeds has, you know, 60-something% of the units. And the costs, you know, vary, but at the end of the day, they're actually 50%, 51% of the total cost of the project, because I think as they've explained to us, Seabeds has lower, less rehab needs, therefore lower construction costs and less operating reserve required than the other one. So I'll just pause there. If there are any questions about Seabeds.
Yeah, oh, thanks, Emily. I forgot to mention when we were talking about the, you know, the finances, that, we did have a meeting with, the select board and the, finance committee about the possibility of, the town issuing a bond, you know, underwritten by, CPC funds. You know, town has done that before. Not for housing projects, but it has done it before, and other towns have done it for housing projects. Make a long story short, the select board, the town managers, the finance committee really didn't think that this was an appropriate time to do that, given that the town meeting is coming up quickly, and they felt they didn't have enough time to do the due diligence. They're still waiting on some information relative to whether there's any profit company involved in the project. There's a lot of big projects coming up with regard to the town. And so the general tenor of the meeting was that, you know, bonding didn't look like a very practical solution at this time. They did, you know, keep an open mind to discussing it in the future, and suggested that that maybe they could meet with Needham Housing Authority to talk about maybe next year. So I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't kill it or say that it's killed outright, but it will require some work if that is going to be a solution moving forward.
Would it be an appropriate time to mention the letter I just sent out about an hour ago in the last night's board meeting?
Yeah, sure.
We of course heard about this, and I've been talking around others in the town, and you know, it's a complicated decision, even if it's theoretically possible. You know, all the ramifications have to be sort of thought through. And we had a NHA board meeting last night. It was a regular monthly board meeting, coincidentally, but we spent a fair amount of time reviewing where things stand. You know, all of, you know, everything's been said over several CPC meetings and what just Dave referred to. And the board voted unanimously to send this letter that I'm going to circulate around, but you haven't gotten because I just got it together today after last night's meeting. And they voted unanimously to amend our original application to be the Seabeds first option, that we've already submitted a draft application for last time around, and to reduce our request from 5.6 million, which is what we originally put in, and then it grew, as we all know, down to 3.2 million, because, you know, that's reality. I was able, I think, to slip a note to Maureen and Lauren, you know, like a handwritten note, because I came right over from the board, our board meeting. So they knew that going in. They didn't get a lot of questions about that, but so that's before.
Right. We can talk about that further in the next agenda item. Any any committee members have any questions? for,
Just a general question about that loan arrangement suggestion. Has that ever been done in the past by the CPC, and does the CPA Act prohibit or allow for it?
Yeah, to my knowledge, the Needham CPC hasn't taken that approach. It was brought up last year.
Yeah.
Town finance department didn't seem interested in that, but, I think we're gonna, re-engage them, this year and find out specifically what the reasons were. I can't remember why it was, rejected last year, or not rejected, but it
Yeah.
wasn't.
Other than it just hadn't been done, like, I don't
Yeah.
remember that either. like,
Yeah,
what
so
their
we'll-
actual reason
Guys, Lauren made a note to talk to Cecilia and,
Couldn't it be called something different? If we're giving them a grant, they could be given donations of free fund, do you know what I mean? Rather than
Not call
a
it a
loan,
loan.
not calling it a,
Yeah,
just calling it a
I mean,
loan
let
makes it
us,
different.
let us dig into it, but to answer your question, I don't believe that Needham's done it, but according to Emily,
Other towns
other
have.
towns.
Yeah, a number of other towns. I think that one of the issues is it would have to be, the loan would have to, couldn't be made by, I don't know who makes the grant now. It would have to go through the trust. I think that was one of the issues, and that would require a certain amount of rethinking and restructuring of the way money flows. I mean, it sounded to me like something that, could be fixed with somebody has to figure out the mechanics and then rework things, and whether an applicant that applied for funds thinking that it would be a grant could then, it would be okay to switch them over to a loan. I don't know. But it was more the mechanics of it than anything else, I think.
All right, well, we'll get into it.
Matt,
Yeah.
Matt, you
It's-
have your hand raised?
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
Is there any other committee member that has a question? I just have one question, regarding the money spent before closing, $750,000. What is that for? I can't remember.
I would afford that question to Matt.
All right, Matt, you had a comment, Matt, and, did you hear my question?
Yes, hi everyone, Matt Zajac, Cambridge Housing Authority, NHA's consultant. Thanks for the opportunity. To answer the most recent question about what the funds would pay for pre-closing, they would pay for architecture and engineering, and then due diligence costs that could not be deferred until closing. So NHA will use the best of its ability to work with its vendors to defer any costs until closing when other sources of funds come in. But those vendors, surveyors, environmental consultants, the architect, they may not be able to hold all of their bills for that period of time. The other primary source that NHA has to fund expenses pre-closing, it's a federal capital program. And that program can be cumbersome to use and also has an annual limit. So having the flexibility to utilize some of the funding pre-closing would be very helpful. Would it be all right if I, thank you.
What is the percent completion of the design at this point? Approximately.
Approximately right now we're at 100% schematic design. And with the determination for seabeds only, we'll release the architect to go into construction documents in the next month.
Can I ask a question? When we say pre-closing, are we talking about soon or, 2 months before the closing? That it makes a difference.
That's a great question, Emily. I think my current thinking is that I would be much closer to closing during that sort of, we have construction documents, more of the funding sources have come in. It might
Yeah.
not be that every single one has a firm commitment, but the picture would be much more solidified. There's current capital funding to fund the next
Yeah.
several months.
I mean,
architecture.
I think what I'm suggesting is, that makes a big difference because the closer you get to closing, the less risk there is. And, you know, I guess this might end up being an issue for T-Chalk, because as I understand it, they're the ones that manage these projects after you've handed them off and approved the funding. So, you know, I'm just suggesting that it be at your discretion and that you be able to judge whether this is an appropriate time for you to take a risk. If it were tomorrow, you would look at it one way. If it was a month before closing, you would look at it differently.
May I comment on that comment? And those two comments?
Yeah.
On that point. So one thing that the chair and Matt does not know about, and Emily does not know about either, is that we've been intensively negotiating the grant funding agreement for the $5.5 million grant from last spring. And that will float in the next few days. We signed it actually earlier today. One of the negotiation points was not the same in any way, shape, or form, but a very similar issue of the town's policy to have for all of their CPA grants, the recipient spends the money first and they submit reimbursement request second. And then it comes to the T-Chalk committee for review. And then and only then, when it's approved, is the town's CPA funding portion of the funds released. So that will bear on this discussion. And I just wanted to note that had happened as we go to other questions, so that nobody came back to me a week ago and said, from now and say, why did you mention that last night? You know.
All right, Lauren, you had
Well, that was actually what I was gonna mention.
Oh, good.
Just because that was a topic that was recently discussed in conjunction with the town and town council and NHA. And also that last night at the select board, during our consultation, they asked, and we did represent to them that again, in this case, the funds would be expended in our usual reimbursement model. And so in terms of, I think their concern and their question was in terms of protecting the town's investment in the event that, you know, the financing doesn't come to fruition, the financial closing type of thing, and how and when the money would be expended. And they were pleased to hear that again, it would be based on that reimbursement model historically followed. So if we were to change that or to suggest changing that, I would suggest that we kind of roundtable that with town council and perhaps circle back with the select board to let them know if it's going to be different. If we're gonna request that it's different.
So are we gonna request it as the? I mean, is that, I'm getting a little
The
confused.
request has been made. But you know, all this is real time updating. I think it, you know, not to speak out of turn, and Peter's here tonight, but I think the expectation would be not to go to T-Chalk with this issue in question, but to go as Lauren suggested. If you talk internally with town council and understand better the need for the you know, and money funding and so forth, and go from there.
Okay.
I mean,
will request
I
that.
think that the circumstances of the two projects are analogous very broadly and loosely, but different.
Okay, any other questions about CVents? No, okay. Emily, why
So-
don't you-
On East Militia Heights, again, you know, the memo goes through in detail, the structure of the project. On this one, and obviously, again, it's a very positive, it will be a very positive project for the town, and I think that for the most part, the numbers are pretty solid, but in this one, I do feel like there's some places where we could push back, and I think we've discussed them a little bit before. One of them is, let's see, there are two, because I actually, in the middle of the night, I came up with a third one, but when I checked it out, it wasn't a good idea. So there's two. One of them is this thing with the reserve. They have a very large $2 million reserve that they're carrying for these 5 staff units, which are currently conceived that the staff people will pay market rent. Now, these are not traditional kind of staff. They're not on the payroll of the project at all, but they are live-in staff who will be available, as I understand it, in the evening and overnight to the residents. So they're going to be living there and providing services, but not getting free rent as it's currently envisioned. They're going to be paying rent. So it's a little odd, but the reserve, which covers their rental costs for the whole 15 years for all 5 units, was explained to us as something that the tax credit investor, based on preliminary discussions, would require. And I've checked around. I mean, nobody else had heard of this, which is not to say that it's. I'm not claiming that they're, fabricating the idea, but it seems like it's. Tax credit investors don't like to take risk. They worry about units that are not tax credit units. If you had a commercial space there might be some kind of reserve required. But in this case, it seemed to me like there's another way of doing it, which is that you could construe these as concession units, like we had a live-in staff. This is what you would do. You would not charge them rent or charge them less rent and carry the rental cost of that unit as a concession in the operating budget. And that way you only have to carry 1 year's worth of rent. And that's a very traditional approach with a staff that lives at the property. And that would save in excess of $400,000. They have said that they would be willing to float this approach with investors. I think this is roughly what they said, but if it didn't work, they would want to be able to come back to you. It's a somewhat early stage of the project. I think there's numerous ways that I'll mention some more that they could push for other sources of funding. But this to me seems like a pretty reasonable thing and an assumption to make about a different way they could do it. And I think the number was 413 or something like that. Not at the moment. So that's one thing. The other is there are 5 units that are going to be rented to households at 80% of AMI, which traditionally these units would not be eligible for tax credits, but now they are under some circumstances under a rule called income averaging, which basically says if you have a lot of very low income units, you can balance them off to 80%. And as long as it all averages out to 60%, which is the standard, you can do it. And a lot of projects do that. I did look again at the QAP. It talks about doing it for projects that are applying for 4% credits only, which they are. But then there's language that says, and that is, there's 2 kinds, 4% and 9%. This is 4%. There's also language in there that says something like this is a very useful tool for preservation projects, that is occupied projects that have a particular income mix that includes the 80% AMI people. So you want to keep them there and don't want to displace them. Makes the most sense for preservation projects. Now, this is not that. It's a new construction 4% project, but I know personally of 4% new construction projects that have gotten this approval. It is discretionary from HLC. I checked around and kind of tried to feel out how discretionary is it, and I got back from people just what I'm telling you, that there are definitely new construction projects that have gotten it. It's mainly a tool for preservation projects. Does that mean that HLC will always approve it? Not necessarily, but it seems like the tendency is that they would. And I do know many projects that put this in their pro formas at an early stage as a reasonable assumption. So that is a big one. that would generate something like 800,000. I have to look at my numbers. I did give you in the numbers pro forma. There's a column that shows these calculations and what it would be if you add the two of them together, and they can be added if you do both. So yeah, it's 413,000 for the concession units, 856,000 for the income averaging. And if you added them together, which you can, it's around $1,000,003, 1,269. So, you know, those are just are two things that I think would be a way to look at this differently. And I will also say that I think there are some sources that they maybe, you know, could look at that they haven't. For example, they haven't talked about applying for home consortium funds. And I think that, you know, they could, as the housing authority has done, and the housing authority didn't get everything that it wanted, but got something. And also, I'm not sure they've maxed out on their energy funds either, because they're only have about 13,000 per unit from those sources, and there are other sources that could be tapped. So we just to say that I think that, you know, this budget could be cut back, and I wouldn't be worried that we're making the project infeasible if it's, you know, within reason. The funding conditions for this one should be that all the tax credit units, and that is 76, should remain available to households below 60% of AMI. If there is, and we probably would amend that, you know, if they're going to do income averaging, then you would say, and I did say, the other 5 units should remain affordable to households with incomes below 80%. Same thing. They have actually promised to elect the form of tax credit regulatory agreement with HLC, which is permanent affordability in perpetuity. But the problem with that, why it's not enough, is that the tax credit restriction does go away in the event of foreclosure. So it's not really permanent in that sense. And also I would say that they should be asked to renew the project-based subsidies, just like we are saying for CBEDs. And then the loan, again, on this one, I did run the numbers so you can see, because they have more cash flow. Let's see what this showed, that at the end, if you split it, just by you're taking half of the 50% with HLC, at the end of the day, there would be about $1,000,004 at 20 years. If they have 20 years, no interest, you would get back about $1,000,004. And if you split it 3 ways, it's $1,000,008. You know, it's not huge, but that, you know, that could fund a couple of projects. And that's something that I, again, think makes sense from a public interest point of view. So, questions about this?
Anybody? Questions? Good job.
Thank you.
No questions. All right. I'm sure that some questions might come up in an afterthought, so we'll get those to you as they come in.
Sure.
All right. All right, so no more questions about Emily's presentation. Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is just to review the various projects and see if there's any updates. Also,
Mr. Chair, do you want Emily to stay on?
that's up to you, Emily. We're just gonna just do some routine business till the end. You can leave if you want.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, we're not gonna talk anymore about these two.
No more questions, but if we do have any, follow-up questions, we'll be sure to get in touch with you.
Okay. Thanks.
All right,
Thank you, Emily.
so now we, have, 6 projects that are in contention. One thing we didn't do before, we had our select board consultation is review the committee with regard to how they feel about these projects. I think in the past, they call it the sense of the committee, or whatever. We have, coming up finance committee consultation, and, I'd like, as we go through these projects, just to get a sense of how everybody feels. My gut feeling just so far is hasn't been, much negative discussion about any of these projects. So if you do feel you have, outstanding questions or concerns, please speak up. First project is the, History Center collection storage upgrade. I don't think there's any updates on that project.
It seems like a no-brainer, oh, project. There's
Yeah.
plenty of money available for,
For the history, yeah.
right, yeah, it's a small ass.
So,
And I was up there with, and they could use it.
oh, yeah,
Yeah, I was in there.
yeah, there was, at the select board consultation, there was a question that came up, as to why didn't, or did the, History Center, consider offsite storage? And, that was answered, by Lauren. I thought it was a good answer, and, I just heard like, Gloria heard the question, and her feedback was, yeah, people are consulting with these artifacts
Yeah, the access to it.
all the time, and it would be really, difficult if they were offsite. So I think, that question was put to bed. So the sense is that this is a good project. So, yeah, all right. The next project, the trail signage improvement, again. Not
Dear to your heart.
yeah, not too many questions about that. Select board didn't have any questions. We had made a presentation to them previously, to get on the, capital plan. And so, sounds like, everybody's favorable.
Yeah, it seems like you could use funds to make the trails very usable.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, great. The third project, Charles River Center, we talked about that, a lot. I think, that, most of the questions have been asked and answered from their team. I don't know if there's anything outstanding from them.
The only thing outstanding was a question from that Reg and Adam both raised with respect to the Charles River Center's proposed timeline for achieving their zoning and friendly 40B process. And whether the request was made for us to check in with Lee Newman and Daphne Collins to find out if they felt that the timeline put forth by CRC was achievable or reasonably feasible. Lee Newman said that she felt it was reasonable. Daphne Collins provided us with an example of a similar project, or that she felt was a similar project, and take a quick look. And in her email, she suggested that it's possible, but perhaps an optimistic timeline. So it's possible, but sounds like it could potentially be a little tight in achieving everything that they need to in time to make that initial preliminary one-stop application in November. But she didn't say no, so I think take from that what you will in your decision making.
Okay, thank you.
My question is really based on what Emily's memo contained and her ideas for different financing options and ways they could potentially scale back and like we could, give less
Yeah.
money. What's the next step for that? I mean, do we then
I think,
go back to Charles River to say, have you considered this? Is this an option? Is this something you're willing to consider? I don't even know what my
Yeah.
question is what the process
no, that's a
is.
good question.
Yeah.
I anticipated that would come up. I don't really think that, tonight's the right time to talk about, how much money we're gonna offer them. Okay.
I just don't know that, do they even have, they don't have this feedback? Do we
Oh,
provide it to them to say,
yeah, I think,
review this and
yes, I think,
potentially come back
there
with?
were several questions that were put to them that, here are some options to, reduce
Consider.
the cost.
Oh.
Of course, they came back and said, oh, well, investors don't like this or whatever, but, I think we should have a discussion about that, probably at our meeting after the hearing,
Okay, yeah,
and where we will, then vote. And, that would be my proposal, that we discuss it then in detail.
okay.
Maureen, Emily raised those questions during, following their presentation. And then the follow-up questions that Emily put into writing were centered around those topics
Okay.
specifically. So she received their responses to her, kind of pushing them to consider those areas where she felt cost savings were achievable. And they responded to her, and she had that prior to putting together this analysis and report.
Okay, so
So that was all part of what she presented to us tonight.
Yeah, so they're aware of what
Okay.
we're thinking. But also, we didn't mention tonight, but they have another source of funding, which is fundraising,
the Catholic campaign. But they're doing-
so
yeah.
they, I think they're in pretty good shape.
They seem to be a relatively wealthy organization.
Well,
Oh, I don't know,
mean,
I don't know about that.
But no, they do a lot of fun.
Yeah, they-
Cause they were talking about another project in conjunction with this, that they were starting a fundraising campaign of.
yeah,
millions.
to put it in
So-
register.
I thought it was for this. I think it's,
To put it in register, they have a natural constituency.
Right.
That they can draw on for support, so,
I would, if I may, I'd add to Maureen's, question. Most of everybody except this side of the table is going through this for the cycle for the first time. And what you find typically is, here we are on the 26th, and all of a sudden the time goes really quick. And then you're right up against the wall on the 19th when we have to have the final meeting discussion. So it's really important now, if there's any more data or analysis or requests from the applicant, like, could you live with, do you think you could make this work or not? That has to be sort of asked now to provide enough time for a considered response. If we ask, we wait until, the public hearing to ask, then we start running out of time.
well, I mean, if you consider this to be at the end of the day, a negotiation. Okay, then, why would they say, yeah, we could live with this?
Well, yeah, I'm just,
I would say that at the end of the day, we can make a judgment and tell them that this is what.
I guess that's right. That's what I'm saying is, does everybody feel like they have enough information tonight to be able to make a judgment, in 3 weeks?
Dave.
Yeah.
I was looking at the numbers, and it seems like if we were to want to fully fund everything, we're around 6.7 million. And we have about 6 million-ish,
Right,
so it's $700,000 gap, is that
yeah, that's,
about right?
yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
anything else?
Specifically, it's a little under 700,000. So the difference between what would be available for housing and what we have, what's requested is $659,767 by my calculation.
Any other comments on Charles River? It seems like everybody feels that it's a good project. It's,
Great job.
we want to move forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
next is Seabed's Cook. Now, we got the letter from Reg, with regard to, their board meeting. They've, NHA had submitted, some revised applications, for this project. I think there were two, but, based on what transpired at your, meeting, it's only the Seabed's only project that will be under
Yeah,
consideration.
that's,
So,
if it
Do we
was
need to
clear.
vote on that, or what do you think?
On accepting the revised application?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
think it probably would hurt, to, to take a vote on that. We do have a quorum.
Okay. All right, so can I have a motion to accept the new revised application for Seabed's?
Seabeds first is what we're calling.
Seabed's first,
So moved.
Second,
second, all in favor?
aye.
All right. Any other comments or questions that we didn't discuss previously on Seabed's Cook?
I would say the same thing on our request. Is there, if there's any other information you need, there's no meeting between now and the public hearing, and then, you go right into the, the decision meeting, so ask now, please.
Well, I did have one question that, about, in your presentation, you listed, how you build up the $3 million.
Okay,
And I was just wondering if there was any background on it, if there was another spreadsheet that,
I'm sure there is, and, but it's very simple, which is you go to the CPA, to the town CPA, to fill the remaining gap that you can't fill with every other funding source. So
Right.
the answer to and I'm happy to ask Matt to put that in writing if you want to follow up. But, you go to every other funding source you can think of and try to make a realistic estimate for what you can get. So, for example, Emily was saying she thought there, CRC could go to home, CRC didn't get enough energy in there. And, and then Emily looks at our funding stack, and if she thought we were, you can say, I'm gonna get $500,000 of energy efficiency funds, when realistically you're only gonna get 300,000. She would have comment on that, but at the end of the day, when you're, exhausted all other sources, then that's how that big number that we asked for the whole project got even bigger. Because, it fills the gap.
yeah, I was more interested in, not the funding side of it, but the use side of it.
Oh,
Like, I looked at your estimate for,
you mean,
for construction, but then I got confused on how you went from there to the total project.
okay,
Like, looked like there were, numbers laid in for development and all that, but it wasn't.
well, maybe you can articulate your question and send it tomorrow. And we can follow up on it if I've misunderstood what you were asking.
Yeah, I mean, I already responded to an email about that previously, right? Because I thought that there might have been another spreadsheet that was,
If I've missed responding to something, please send it to me
Okay.
again, okay, but,
I just wanted to square.
what I can say on the cost side, there are 100-page reports. Sort of estimating at the nuts and bolts level, or this much concrete and this much steel and this much.
Yeah.
Electricians and so forth and so on. For this building versus, all 11 buildings by building. And then they roll it up. And that's how, and it's been done now 3 times. So this last one that produced an even bigger number.
Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah.
familiar with that. I was just trying to understand how you went from, like, I looked at, there was like a 1-page summary of construction.
Are you talking about for the, that would be covered by CPA funding? Is that what you're talking about? Or- I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay,
If you could send a
yeah,
specific request, that would be great. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you do have
Okay,
mountains of information.
okay. Any other questions on seabeds? Seabeds first.
By the way, we have to say that because, it was a kind of tough to accept the reality. And so our Hooks residents really want to know that we haven't given up on them whatsoever. And as soon as we can get these two projects funded, that we're gonna go back and figure out how to get the Cook upgrade done. So you'll hear it.
Okay.
Spoken to together.
All right, the next project, Needham Housing Authority, High Rock Estates. Have you, well, I don't know if the rest of the committee had read the notes, but the town council basically opined that that project is not eligible for funding through CPA grant,
Are you talking about some new notes that came out or the original one,
the
2
original,
months?
yeah. Well, no, I think he confirmed it, right?
He confirmed it. He said that he was going to put something together to
Oh,
share with the
sorry.
committee, but we've not yet received it in writing.
I thought we had.
project is?
The
The
one,
High Rock
Rock.
Estates
Land use study.
Oh,
for $150,000. So
So what is the timing for getting that formal feedback from the town council?
In writing, I will have to follow up with him. He was probably about a week or so ago.
What
when
was
he
before the
suggested-
last, no, what was before the last?
he sent.
It's way back. It was back when we did the first review there.
Oh, well, no, I mean, so he issued his initial opinion and then, we coordinated a meeting where Reg and the chairs met with town council and had a conversation about it. Following that meeting, he conferred with attorneys from the DOR to just kind of confirm his understanding of the IGR and their recommendations. Following that conversation, the attorney from the DOR essentially confirmed Chris Heap's opinion. And so once he had that kind of final confirmation after considering what you had to say in the meeting and the information that you shared from the Mass Housing Partnerships, and then following up with DOR, he determined that his position is unchanged. And then he considers this project to be ineligible for CPA funding because it can't be considered creation of community
And he
housing.
put that in an email.
I have
An
not
informal
seen-
email
I've not
to-
seen that
It,
email.
it was an email, whether you call it informal or not, it was basically an email, and he said he would confirm his decision.
Right.
And right,
And so
I have
we're just-
not seen a follow-up email from the first email.
Right, he suggested that he would be sending one to the group that was present at the meeting, so it would be official. That's just yet to issue.
And that's what I was asking, what is the estimated time of arrival for that?
I do not have an ETA on that, but I would think if I follow up with them. Probably within a reasonable amount of time. I can-
all right, so
but-
you want his memo before? you-
Well, I do
Or
think that
would you be
be a
satisfied with
courtesy.
with the email?
No, I would, I think I'd like to have it in writing, if for no other reason that this is the funding mechanism that has been used repeatedly by the town since 2005, and we wouldn't be sitting here having an argument about, not an argument, but considering, the complexities of going forward with the Linden Street redevelopment or the Seabed Cook. We wouldn't be having the Seabed Cook project before us if in fact this new policy has been in place. So I would appreciate it if we would, make the effort to write down the reasons, or his initial email was pretty high level. And yeah, I think not just for us, but for any applicant, if you're turning them down after this mechanism has been used 5 times, 4 times, I forget how many times. I think it should be in writing. If this is a policy, not subject to everybody sort of vaguely remembering from year to year as the committee membership turns over.
It is certainly his intent to put it into writing. I just
Oh,
don't
no,
know
I
what date
understand that.
to expect it specifically.
All right, well,
It'd be great to have a date.
yeah, but, you know, for all practical purposes. The project is,
No, I'm not questioning your report. I'm questioning whether, when we would be able to have the town council's opinion in writing, you
okay,
know. And not a one-liner that just says, you know, it doesn't qualify, that the original informal impression said it's, the project's not qualified. One sentence.
okay,
And then we submitted a fairly extensive brief saying, I think you're mistaken. We consulted with outside experts and we consulted with Stuart Saginaw and the Community Preservation Coalition. We supplied all that information. And all we have is a one line from December-ish or whatever it was, saying this project is not qualified. I think
well,
we ought to have more, in my humble opinion.
all right, let's,
Because, you know, we're
well,
gonna have to
let's-
find a completely new form of doing this sort of funding. Which is, of course, not an impossibility, but to have this be a change that was suddenly made. I think it behooves us all to have this in writing.
okay, that's in the works. Next project is, the Action Park and pickleball courts. Who's the liaison? I forget.
Keith and me,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing,
no news.
okay,
And I think, so this is for the design of the park. And I think it's well thought through in terms of where it's going to be located in their process and personally, I'm a proponent.
the rest of the committee feel favorable.
Well, I'm a huge proponent of pickleball,
Okay,
but I don't have to go into it, but. And it's very popular in town and, I've met a lot of people who. So. I don't know much about skateboarding.
yeah, one question that came up. Last night was what the capital cost of that project might be,
The what?
the capital
Capital cost.
cost.
Of the pickleball?
Yeah, of the project, you know, they're asking for three
I
hundred,
think, I thought there was some estimate that was in the report. I think it's like 1.1 million for pickleball. And the skateboard, and whatever it is like over 2
It
million.
was around 3, so.
But that's total,
Total.
but I think the pickleball portion was like 1.1 million.
yeah, that's pretty.
It's sort of like half the cost of tennis courts.
Yeah, all right. Any other thoughts? Sounds like everybody's favorable. For that,
Yeah.
okay, the final project is the Elliott School.
Yeah.
Grounds renovation and,
That's another one where it's design. I mean, we've seen the pictures, we've
Yeah.
seen the fields,
they got some issues.
they need some more.
Yeah, my kids went to the Elliott School. When the school was built, they didn't give a penny to the Elliott School.
Yeah.
We fundraised just for the playground, so.
So the significant question that was asked at the select board meeting was whether the rock was gonna stay.
Big boulder.
I thought it had to stay. I thought it's like a historical
That's another million,
something.
that's another $1,000,000 again.
Yeah, right.
All right, it sounds like committee is favorable in that regard. All right. Next item on the agenda is the public hearing, which is coming up on the is that the 12th? March 12th. I put together some rules for conducting public hearing, sort of based on, I had a couple of bad experiences on the Conservation Commission. with, public comment. I felt in a
Not enough
conservation.
structure or something? or
No,
what
people,
was-
people going off on tangents and,
Yeah,
and I felt it would be useful to have, some rules. That,
Time limits for comments.
and so based on what we did on the Conservation Commission, I modified it slightly for the, our public hearing. So I thought we could discuss that, modify it, and, maybe vote to approve it. To me, two biggest things is, especially, this go round, because we have like 6 projects, although 2 of them are, 10 times more complicated than the other ones. Put some guidelines on timing. And also, make sure that that there's a guideline that, this is to review these projects, to get public input on these projects and not any others, issues that people might want to bring up. And also, that the hearing is to get public input, and it's not a dialogue between the commission or the committee and the various members of the public. They can ask questions, and if we have time, we can, answer the question or direct to the applicant to answer the question. Or we could get back to them after the meeting, depending on the timing. So, any thoughts, or should we allow more time for the housing projects? Just,
Did you write down these rules? or-
yeah.
Yeah,
they're-
it's the
they're-
final,
Were they in the
I
packet?
mean, 15 minutes per presentation, so, yeah.
What page is it on?
So that means.
Last page, it's the very end.
15, you go to 20, I mean, that's sort of what happens.
Yeah, I could see allowing more for the housing authority and for Charles River. But I'd almost want to take away from the other 2 to do that. Like, I don't know if that's fair, but I just feel like the other 2 are pretty basic, simple, straightforward.
Yeah,
And
we're,
10 minutes would probably do it for them, I think, but
or, we don't have to, I think it would be unfair to say, well, you get 10 minutes. and you
Yeah.
get, so I'd say this is just a general guideline. Let the chair enforce the timing.
Okay.
But this is my own personal belief that I think that, all the materials have been put out there. I had this, same, belief with the select board and with the finance committee, there's all the materials there, right? And I think that we should expect people to read the material, and if they have questions, we address the questions, or if they have comments, we address the comments.
Mhm.
I don't think that it's necessary for a presentation. I go through all the details of the project,
oh, no, I
so
don't either.
you
We've
know,
all heard
can't
it,
do it in
we've all-
15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah,
That's my personal opinion.
I think these are all reasonable, limits to put on people, presenters, etc. David, you plan to just read that kind of,
Yeah, I would just kind of summarize it. at the
yeah, so
beginning.
that people understand what this is, this is the structure, these are the limits and stuff like that, so that we can kind of keep things moving.
I would tell, correct me if I'm wrong, but, isn't the protocol that, it's the applicants that are going to be making a presentation, not the, CPC?
Right.
Is that correct? And maybe the liaison can make a quick introduction. I think that's what we've done in the past.
I believe so, that's my understanding.
So we
That's
should,
how it
we
works.
should just, tell the applicants that, we're looking for 15-minute presentation.
At most,
Yeah.
and just make, they don't have to use all their time if they don't need it.
So how many applicants?
There's 6.
So if you have 15 minutes per applicant, you're an hour and a half into the meeting now. hour and 3/4.
Right,
And that's a lot of time to go before you start taking public comment.
well, I would.
Can we do it after each one?
Yeah, I
I
propose to
think-
take comments, so after each presentation.
No, I'm not, I'm sorry, I'm not, whether it's as you go or that's still an awful long time before, just with application,
I don't think-
presentations,
I don't
if
think
everybody
most
takes their
presentations
15
will be
minutes.
15 minutes.
Right,
I'm just saying, okay? you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
You gotta sort of think, is it better to have a even shorter time, like 5 minutes? Because, it's not some, as long as you put materials out ahead of time and so forth, as you said. The purpose of a public hearing is to have the majority of the time available for the public to talk, and if you're already almost 2 hours in, I'm exaggerating, to make my point a little bit, but I'm just trying to say, if you're looking for a guideline, one thing to do is to say, oh, you got 5 minutes, so 5, 6, or 30 minutes of presentation with questions in between. And you don't have whoever's last arbitrarily, who is the last one, the pickleball
well, we
player.
could have a lottery.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't going there, but I'm just saying, whoever's last, people will start to peel out of there, if they're on Zoom or something like
Yeah,
that.
Right.
I'm okay with
Yeah.
restricting it to 5 or 10 minutes.
And then the only other thing I would comment, just over years of being is remarkably few people show up.
Right.
Who are genuinely, members of the public, who have, you get the proponents and applicants.
Yeah.
Coming in hordes, all the pickleball people in
Yeah.
Beaver will fill the auditorium here, but, just offering that as observation.
Yeah, okay, so, I don't see any problem in,
I mean,
limiting the time.
Compromise on 10 minutes, there you go.
well, so some of them are pretty simple,
Yeah.
well, as you
Yeah,
said,
10 minutes or fewer.
Yeah.
But I think trying to explain the complexities of, low income housing investment and, you're just not gonna get anywhere.
No.
You wanna say something, just picking on me is probably the most complex project. You're gonna wanna say something like, we have these
Don't
dilapidated
mention the
units.
fair clock, but-
Whatever gave you that idea? I never thought of that, the point is, that's the, the inside baseball stuff that everybody's
Right.
starting to understand. But there, it's more just to say, this is how we're using the money. And trying to provide as much time as possible for public comment. Not repeating things that we already have been
All right,
spent a
so-
whole season learning.
We want to leave it at 5 minutes, 10 minutes? What?
I mean, I,
Well,
I'd say-
leave it at 5 minutes and then it's.
Yeah, if somebody's gonna go.
Most
over it-
probably won't even go 5 minutes.
3-minute
I would,
breaks.
in fairness, I think the CRC project and, seabeds would be a 10-minute
All
one.
right, so
And
why don't we?
everybody else would be 5 minutes, maybe.
or
Yeah,
let's
trail
just-
signs, I think everybody can understand what that's about.
Well, if you're getting 10 minutes, I want.
Yeah, there you go. You want
No, seriously. Let's
Well,
just,
I'll
let's just,
flip a coin.
no, let's just change it for 10 minutes and, people are gonna go over and people are gonna go under, but at least we're setting some.
Yeah, some standard.
Any other,
10 minutes. and then
10 minutes.
Yeah.
any other,
I think 3 minutes is a reasonable limit for comment.
okay,
I think that's fair. I don't see that people need more than 3 minutes.
okay, anything else?
I don't know, how's everybody feel about that?
All right, so should we vote? on
I would
this or
add
just-
only to that, and maybe it's obvious that, and then planning board and the conservation, does this very well, and so is the conservation commission. You really enforce that 3 minutes. But invite people to send in emails or written additional
Additional
questions or
comments,
comments and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
forth.
we
As a
have that.
safety valve, yeah.
All right, so we'll,
Well, actually, to that point, if I may, the conditions that you proposed, suggested that public comments. Were you envisioning not being accepted after the public hearing closes, or just not being entered into the?
no, I think we had like, we talked about this, so, you know, like the Wednesday following the meeting, we gave like a time period.
Okay, so just, that's a little different from what was in the packet. We talked about, instead of not accepting comments after the public hearing, to give people at least, some amount of time, if following the hearing and the presentations, if they have something more to add in writing, that we would accept them up until,
Yeah, I thought we changed it, so.
so the hearing is Wednesday. And then
Wednesday,
when
yeah.
then we vote the following Wednesday, so
Yeah.
we would accept them up until Monday, I think, you said.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so we can change that. All right, any other comments? So we'll revise this. I don't think we need to vote on this. It's up to you. Okay. But you could put the written comment timeframe in the,
on the website.
Yeah.
Mhm.
you already sent out or did you send out the announcement?
Well, the legal notice has gone out to Hometown Weekly and
Okay.
will be published in the next two editions. And then there will be another announcement that will go out in the newsletter, the news you need to know. And we could add that into.
Yeah, I
that
think that was it.
announcement, and that will be published the week before.
Okay,
One more thing, I'm just remembering, sorry, and I missed this one right at the very end. I thought I had read everything through, but I didn't get there. You might want to, it'd be sort of customary to ask the applicants to share their draft slides with the liaisons like a week ahead of the public hearing, which would be next, whatever it is, the 5th of March or something like that, too. And then, you know, the liaison just sort of, you know, take a look, and it also has to, you know, do the introduction, so you don't wanna be making the same points in the introduction that is then, you know, repetitive in the presentation.
so maybe you could send out a notice to the applicants about the
Yes.
timing and send out your slides.
Okay.
All right,
Much time for weeks and skip. That's a joke.
all right,
That's-
any
Bring your weed killer.
any more discussion on the public hearings? No? Okay. I don't have any other issues to bring up at this time. I don't know if anybody else does. No? Somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
I-
Aye.
Great, thank you.
How long have you?